Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar on Headless as a stepping stone for omnichannel. I'm super happy to have Casper Rasmussen with me today. Hi, Casper.
Hey Malte.
My name is Malte. I'm the CTO of Vercel. I've been here for a year. It's been an amazing year. Before that, I was at Google for ages, 11 years or so. I was running Google desktop search and the infrastructure for search on the front end. So I'm broadly familiar with this topic, but I'm also kind of still learning the industry terms. So this is a really cool thing for me as well to learn about. And we have Casper here. Why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
I'll be happy to, and thanks for having me, first and foremost. My name is Casper Rasmussen. I'm the president of the MACH Alliance, and I'm also the SVP of technology globally at Valtech, where I'm heading up our MACH and our composable enterprise business.
That's awesome. By the way, are you saying MACH or MACH today?
I'm saying MACH because
okay,
I feel for it.
I'm with you. As a fellow European with a, in my case, German background, I'm very happy with MACH. So, but yeah, what is it? Like, what's the MACH Alliance?
The MACH Alliance is a not-for-profit organization that seeks to evangelize for an alternative to what we know as being the limiting suites, meaning enterprise brands being able to opt into an alternative path to digital innovation. So we're really evangelizing for open architectures. We're evangelizing for flexibility and agility. And the MACH Alliance is an alliance by nature, meaning it's basically a collection of members that fit a certification criteria, meaning they are able to realize the promise of what MACH stands for.
Interesting. So when I'm a member, what does it actually mean for me?
You obviously get access to a community of like-minded, meaning, for instance, Vercel, as a member, get access to all of our councils, they get access to all of our internal structures, and clearly the MACH Alliance is a member-led organization, meaning it's driven by our members to help educate the actual community in the industry that's around us. And then from an industry and a community standpoint, there is a ton of evangelization, meaning we help brands and we help business leaders understand why MACH is relevant for them, what type of step to take first, why is it a path to omnichannel, meaning there are a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts that we help basically clarify on behalf of the marketplace. And the MACH certification itself, which is one of our key value adds to the actual industry, is basically a vouch, or it's a backing of an actual company to make sure that we also believe that they enable what MACH set out to realize in the first place, meaning a company like Vercel is truly fitting with the types of technical criteria that we would expect from any type of company being within the MACH Alliance.
I would like to kind of maybe start by talking about how that fits into a modern web experience, how these terms kind of come together. So let's maybe start with omnichannel and how that fits into the bigger picture of the web.
Yeah, you can say that we're all consumers in our everyday, right? And the web is one of many types of destinations that we interact with. So websites is clearly only a part of the actual equation. Omnichannel is our ability to serve all types of channels that exist within an ecosystem of a brand. This could be ranging from social media through to actual advertisement, down to websites and apps, through to the actual experiences that sit within physical brick and mortar locations, like within retail, with some of the digital experiences that might be presented at the point of sale, or as you're progressing or as you're approaching, any types of associates that might be in store. So omnichannel is really this notion of kind of embracing the holistic journey of a customer, and also understanding and acknowledging that that customer has done interaction with your brand prior to visiting the website, and will also continue to do interaction with your brand post visiting your website too.
100%. Hopefully they at some point buy something from me, right?
Indeed.
So is this like the future? Are companies doing it today? What's happening in the market?
We see that brands need flexible technology in order to accommodate the proliferation of channels that do happen within the market. So we do see that channels are coming and going. We see that net new touch points are arising, and we see that businesses needs to be equipped in order to react accordingly. It's not about knowing the 5-year strategy anymore. Every company needs a strategy, certainly, but there are some details that you simply can't predict and you can't foresee. And that's where businesses need a flexibility that are able to help them react to those market opportunities that do present themselves. We've seen the waves of social media. We've seen when TikTok went in and took over. There are lots of conversations around the metaverse and kind of these alternate universes, and all of that, only the future will tell, right? Like which of these are actually going to pick up and apply traction, which of these brands and businesses need to go in and capitalize on. That's where you need an architecture and a technical ecosystem that can also allow you to react in the first place.
Yeah, I think this is actually really, really cool framing in terms of that. It's the only thing that's certain is change. And so you have to kind of have an architecture that can deal with that. If you kind of strictly say it's going to be this, then the chances of making a bad bet is obviously super high. Now, like when I hear people talking about omnichannel and topics like that, like words like headless and composable kind of come up in the same paragraph. And so I'd love to hear from you kind of how you actually think about these terms and how they relate to omnichannel.
Yeah, so headless is clearly that the actual experience is separate from the underlying architecture, or is separate from the underlying services that are serving some of the points of data. So this is about being API driven and API led, right? Meaning that there is an opportunity for any type of experience to consume the data that experience actually needs in order to be meaningful and relevant to the actual consumer. Omnichannel is about the fact that the architecture can have no assumption or any limitation. The way you design your content model, the way you set up your commerce engine, it needs to be equipped and set up in a way that it can serve content to any type of touch point. A voice interface is very different from an interface from where you do click or use a mouse. And the same with the type of transaction, meaning you need to be able to accept transactions from anywhere. Running commerce within a marketplace is very different from running commerce within a social media environment through to running commerce within a website. But what they do have in common is that they accept transactions. So omnichannel is really this ability for you to be able to unlock any type of experience, no assumptions, no limitations, and you're designing for that fact that change in it is inevitable, and the fact that you don't know what you need to do out there in the future.
Cool. I think that kind of puts omnichannel at least in connection to headless. If I would summarize, it's basically headless as the notion that there's something in the background that's an API that has some data, and I put different heads on it that are targeting a specific kind of channel in the omnichannel world, right?
Yeah, it's certainly an enabler, right? It's a prerequisite. First and foremost, you need to make sure that you have different layers in your stack that are operating independently, meaning you can actually deploy changes out to your front end independent of your back end and the underlying services that sit behind. But that doesn't require you to change the way you approach your content modeling or the types of channels that you do need to support in the future. So I do definitely see this being more of a progressive, step-by-step type of an approach, where headless is by nature a very logical place to start, because it's kind of the underpinning of any type of opportunity, whether you continue to go down the web channel as being the channel of focus, which makes a ton of sense because that's where the majority of interaction and engagement sit. But then headless at least allow you to go out and explore different types of channels that you can serve from the same type of architecture and the same type of infrastructure. Hence, you also may need downstream to make some of the design choices that you've done kind of take on those a bit differently. For instance, how you're actually working with content or how you are driving transactions through your services and your APIs.
Right. Now we talked about this notion of headless, which always comes with a head, how it's related to omnichannel. Another term that certainly comes up in these conversations quite a lot is composable architecture. And I think you kind of, at least talked about what it is, but you haven't actually put it into like relation to the term. So how does composable fit into this bigger picture?
Composable is, as the name kind of alludes to, the ability for you to compose a solution, right? So that requires that you're sitting with multiple independent components that you are basically composing and creating solutions from. Composable also allows you to look at your architecture in a bit of a different light than you did historically, where you start to look at domains and you start to look at some of those logical groupings. It's what Gartner calls packaged business capabilities. And these logical groupings might actually be a type of an experience. So product discovery versus accepting a transaction versus post-purchase and customer retention. those might be 3 different types of domains. Composable basically means that you're starting to compose solutions from these shared components that you may have, meaning you start to reuse and recapitalize on the investments that you may have done in the past. So that's the reconfiguration. So think about the comparison back into a Playmobil, which is like an out-of-the-box turnkey kind of toy that our kids may use, versus something like Lego, where you can go in through the bricks and compose whatever type of creature that you truly want for whatever type of purpose you truly need it for. It's fundamentally that same or similar type of difference.
Right. If I may put this into concrete terms, in the past, you might have said, okay, I want to have an e-commerce store on the web. I'm going to buy this package, and it comes with a recommendation engine, with my product catalog, with a transaction system, has an integration to my fulfillment system. Like all these things are kind of one thing. And I think with composable, what you mean is that you might buy best in class offering in each of these systems. Is that right?
Yeah, and you also combine a buy and build strategy, right? Meaning there are also places where your business fundamentally will be different, where you can't buy, but you need to build for purpose. So it is truly this combination of building best of breed, buying best of breed and composing those into solutions, but also mixing in the places where you need to build because you're different or you're looking to have a unique edge in the market. Again, composing your solution from these building blocks, it could be best of breed, so it could be built components. That's kind of the crux of what a composable architecture is all about. And then making sure that there is cohesion across it, right? Making sure that these can interplay and there is interoperability in between the components too.
Cool. Yeah, I love that point around kind of build or buy being like not this monolithic decision that you make once at the very start, but like basically every time, and that you kind of emphasize like what is it where I want to stand apart and be like the best in the world versus kind of just buying. Obviously, I'm always trying to buy the best of breed, but I accept that all my competitors kind of have the same thing because it's I would say for payments you have to be like amazing. But maybe you don't invest like another $1 million in being the very, very best in the world because it's actually benefit of everyone kind of having a similar flow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's also fair to say the maturity of any type of business will also go in and dictate where they can actually expect to innovate, right? Meaning rarely do companies ever innovate on tax as being a very boring but realistic example, right? That's where you always, in 99.9% of the circumstances, see that you're bringing a best of breed tax solution to the party. But then on the flip side, if you start to look at customer retention and loyalty, that's very often where you can see a lot of bespoke and very unique experiences to be created by those brands to make sure they're driving that long-tail retention as well. So really picking where you want to build versus buy is super important. But one of the most important parts of composable architectures is that building and buying can coexist, and it's not an either or type of choice or selection you need to do, like you often did with more monolithic types of architectures.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm a business and I'm interested in omnichannel as a strategy, I might be on different kind of path on that journey. What technical considerations do I have to think about if I want to go in this direction?
There are a few. Like I said, headless is a natural first step because you need to start to detach the actual experience from those underlying services in order for you to even start to touch and potentially break apart those services and introduce more composable best of breed components. So starting to decouple the front end is a natural choice. Start to actually get APIs in place through which the front end can consume data and can go in and also execute transactions. And then make sure you understand your asset stack. Make sure you understand truly what are some of those logical components that your stack today is kind of constructed through. They may be of monolithic nature. They may be tightly coupled. They may be very, very deeply connected and integrated. But start to understand what is that stack actually consisting of. So you can also start to potentially decompose it, right? Like actually start to gradually move away from a monolithic architecture to something that is much more MACH and composable like. That's a typical path that we see big brands and big commerce companies go through, simply to make sure that they also acknowledge that it's not just a migration that will happen overnight. There is an existing business that needs to be up, it needs to be running, and it's a business that you can't introduce any type of risk into because it carries likely a lot of revenue. So starting to really deconstruct that monolith and introduce more MACH and best of breed components to kind of augment it and strengthen it, yet also let that be the vehicle to a more composable stack over time. That's the type of technical consideration that we often see. But it does assume that you understand your as-is architecture quite well. So that would likely be one of the very first types of steps that you need to go into as a business.
If I compose my experience in the broad sense, kind of the omnichannel can mean many things. Are there considerations on the user experience side I have to take into account? I imagine that one of the benefits of buying a monolith is maybe everything fits together. I mean, I'm not even sure that's true, but at least in theory, maybe that's true. Are there considerations like that for kind of the headless approach?
There is certainly page speed performance, right? I think that's a pretty obvious one. At least what we see is that the page speed performance always improves when you start to actually move your front end into an individual component. There is the frequency of change. That's a UX consideration too, meaning time to market for new experiences and new features. Being able to compete in the world of digital as a brand is something that matters a lot to your ability to satisfy customer expectations. So those two in particular would be pretty important UX considerations to really take into account as you are choosing to go down this omnichannel and also the composable path.
Yeah, I think you're saying you're usually seeing performance to go up. We're seeing this as well, and it's not completely obvious that that's the case, but it seems to be the case, and maybe it's just because some of these systems are old and kind of a little bit crusty, and so kind of because especially the front end world has been moving really fast, like being able to kind of put something on top that's actually high performance is kind of in a way an easier win than maybe it appears on the first case. Are there pains related to omnichannel, especially in consideration with headless architecture?
There are always pains that you need to go in with eyes wide open around. Typically, there is a big consideration to make on the organizational side, like how do you start to organize your teams? Specifically, omnichannel by definition also means that the way you need to think about content needs to be broader than just a website, as an example. So the way you start to actually work with content, the way you start to work with data, the way you need to start to work with merchandising, meaning there needs to be a bit of a broader mindset to the types of digital marketing activities that you start to do. So there are certainly some impacts, I would call them positive more than anything, but there are some considerations that you certainly need to apply as you start to embark on a omnichannel type of architecture.
So I think you already talked quite a bit about how headless is a bit of a stepping stone to omnichannel, or like it's basically a required thing more than obviously like the end of it all, right? But I think it's worth kind of going into this a little bit more, explaining how these two things fit together.
Yeah, so one of the prerequisites between even realizing a separate front end is that you can actually access your data and your transactions in a headless fashion, meaning through APIs, right? So that is why it truly is a stepping stone, because it's the prerequisite that sit behind. What you're also putting in place when you go down and embrace headless, for instance, on top of an existing monolithic stack, meaning one that by nature isn't headless in itself, is also that you're introducing potentially brand new front-end technology that is much more fitting with the type of architecture that you're moving towards. So think about the likes of Vercel, think about the frameworks like Next and some of the more modern ways of thinking about the front-end architecture itself. It could come down to the type of rendering approach you actually choose. So there are some very important design decisions and some very important capabilities that you're introducing into both your organization and your tech teams, but also into your architecture as you're starting to go down that first headless type of step as a part of this omnichannel journey.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you triggered me kind of speaking out a little bit about front-end technologies, but I think it's so interesting. Like one of the things that, especially in the React world, which is like, I think the dominant rendering library. If you look back a year, it just didn't support any streaming. And that's kind of not great if you're building something like an e-commerce store where you often have different backends that are of different performance characteristics, right? And so it's great to see kind of now like emerging this technology where we're doing things like saying, hey, I have my product detail page and the data is super fast for the page. I can render it immediately, but then maybe it takes a little bit longer for the availability to stream in, and even a little bit longer for the recommendations to stream in, and that kind of being in the architecture versus something you kind of, have a super high class engineering team to even build. So I think it's great to see stuff is actually happening, and Headless kind of gives you the ability to take advantage of this very quickly, as opposed to kind of waiting for your vendor to catch up.
Yeah, no, some of these mixed rendering modes is certainly of benefit, especially for ecom, like you're saying, because there are so many dynamic components, and static site generation won't cut it because of all of the dynamic pieces of information or those types of components. And as you're embarking on this headless piece, and as your organization are starting to kind of uncover some of these facts and these opportunities, you're also challenging yourselves from an engineering standpoint to really embrace it and to really start to take advantage of what the frameworks and these types of technologies really allow you to do. So it's a really good first step, potentially not even the first of first, but like an early step for an organization to start to get into something that is much more flexible and much more agile.
Right. I think it's also worth contextualizing this a little bit into like the wider microservice trend, which I think is substantially older than Headless itself. And so I think many companies, I hope, are already kind of on a journey on the IT side of the organization that's kind of has been going in this direction, and so Headless is kind of bringing it to the front end as well. So I think that's I think another important thing to take into consideration for businesses to decide whether this is the right step for them.
Yeah, for sure. And just the way you're starting to organize your front end. Again, if we compare back to a very monolithic stack where the front end is connected through basically backend technology, the way you're organizing your front end architectures with, for instance, Next and React is also that you're embracing the modularity of the actual experience. And you can start to actually change single components over changing the entirety of the stack over and over again. It's the exact same type of benefit that you see, going back to your question about composability, that the actual blast radius of change is minimized, it's lowered, meaning you can iterate much faster, you can do it with less testing, right? Meaning you go into it eyes wide open because you know what the ripple effect may be, and it's much clearer to you as an engineer. There are tons of benefits of starting to look at technology a bit differently, and Headless is really an important step for some of those opportunities and for some of those benefits to be even unlocked or to be even like achievable within the front end part of the stack. Because typically in a more coupled front end, you didn't have the option or the opportunity of using something as, for instance, Vercel or Next for that matter.
Right. So you mentioned that people are seeing success. Like if I'm doing a project, what metrics should I look at, and maybe what kind of success stories have you been seeing in this space?
Yeah, the obvious metrics would obviously be about the actual bounce rate, meaning making sure that you get more and better quality traffic in, lowering the actual page speed performance, as in clearly making the website faster has a positive impact on your actual bounce rate, making sure that less people actually choose to bounce off your site as they come in through, for instance, organic channels. Also, your SEO rankings will clearly go up because of that too. And then your conversion rate, meaning better experiences, faster experiences simply produce happier clients or happier customers. And that is also a fact that you just need to take into account. So there are some very, very easy to track, but also quite important business metrics that you can attach to this type of a change if you are going from a decoupled front end to a headless type of an approach for your actual front end. And it's something that's going to hit your business directly, as in your top line and your bottom line as well.
Right. I think it's really important to actually look at the top and bottom line. My favorite anecdote ever was when YouTube.com made their homepage twice as fast, and the bounce rate went up. Everyone was like, "Why?" And what happened was that there were all these users, and specifically in Africa, who had never been able to load youtube.com. And so they were not in the statistic. But they were clearly the users who were like slightly more inclined to bounce. And now, because the website was twice as fast, they were actually being able to load. And so they were now being counted as like, low propensity users. Obviously, some of them, actually ended up buying things, or in this case, watching a video, right? And so I think it's always important to like look at if I'm making more money, then it's good, even if my conversion rate maybe goes down because I somehow like made the funnel bigger. Yeah, and I'm super on board with looking at page performance. One of the projects maybe at Google I'm most proud of is shipping page experience ranking into Google search based on core web vitals, and so that's I can't talk about how much of a ranking factor it is, but it's certainly one of the, I think, most controllable ways to go up in SEO rankings. Everything else is a little bit like, a black box, so to say, or like under other people's control, are they linking to you, etc. But like whether you're fast or not is just something that you can just control and do yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Jürgen Weltag, in like your own experience, is this something that your customers, the companies you're working with are interested in? Are they adopting? What are the strategies around that you're pursuing to get folks into this technology trend?
The most prominent or consistent piece is about this notion of incremental, meaning stepping stones, right? Acknowledging and kind of accepting the fact that it's not a big bang. It's not A to B type of shift you need to do. You need to go through multiple incremental steps in order to get there. I think that's the most recurring and consistent trend that I'm seeing, and also the recommendation that we're constantly providing, because there is a paradigm shift attached and associated to not just headless, but also composable. And you need to bring your organization on that journey too, meaning you also need to accept that people needs to be shifted across as well. That means the types of processes and environments in which your colleagues are working. It means the types of techs and frameworks in which your engineers and your delivery teams are working, meaning there are lots of folks that need to go through a lot of change as you're kind of shifting from that as is to your to be destination. And thinking about incremental steps, finding ways of potentially applying Strangler-Fick patterns to kind of start to decompose and gradually move across. Those are the types of opportunities that we often see. And the best part about it is honestly that it allows you to unlock business value along the way. Instead of sitting and waiting for that long period of time where potentially a program could take, 18 months or even more, finding ways of really unlocking value and start to put some of the actual tech to use and get it into production fast without going in and introducing a ton of risk to your business. Like that's really what ends up moving the needle. And that's kind of the recipe for success for some of these larger transitions or migration strategies as you're putting it.
People ask me this question a lot, and also sometimes they don't ask, and I tell them anyway that there is no software project that aren't incremental. Like there are software projects that start out as not incrementally planned, but at some point you realize, it's now been so long, we need to see some impact, and you're kind of shifting to an incremental strategy. So it's better to start out there right away rather than doing it later in the strategy. Like to make it very concrete, like we have a not sure I can name the name, so let's say a very large e-commerce company on hosted on Vercel, a customer of ours, and so the way they did it was they basically said, okay, in their case they were on Salesforce Commerce Cloud and they want to transition them to a headless solution, and so basically they said initially, I'm just gonna have this front end proxy, and it goes to my old site. And so basically they're now replacing kind of route by route. They start with the homepage and already saw substantial gains there just for the homepage. And just because it was faster, kind of reducing overall bounce rates. And then, they started doing the product detail page, the listing page, etc. But they're doing them one by one and they're launching them as they're ready rather than kind of waiting for the final big bang. And that I think it both, you mentioned this, it gets you faster to initial impact, but also like it's substantially de-risked. So maybe it's actually not good. Like maybe you're doing something that's not good, and so you want to know early so you can actually course correct and make the right change.
For sure.
Like on that incremental migration, what's the very first step to going headless?
I would say that is to understand your existing stack and how you can actually start to progress towards that headless milestone that you have.
Yeah.
One type of a monolith to headless versus another type of monolith to headless, the journey is different. There is no single approach, one size fits all for what you need to do in order to kind of start to put APIs in place, start to deliver your front end independently, what types of frameworks and tools you need to kind of adopt and embrace. Like the journey is somewhat bespoke for most companies. Really understanding your as is and what those potential transition strategies or those steps could look like, that would be the right place to start. It is more than simply building out a brand new front end. It is more than simply putting APIs in place. It is kind of going across multiple different components and different types of technologies in your existing stack. So really understanding what you're working with is a very, very important first step.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong there, like usually if I'm on some monolith, they kind of have at least something that like looks like a headless API. And so like usually I don't actually have to migrate away from that system. I can say it's there, I'm going to put a new head on top rather than kind of having this like super large project where I also have to like switch out the backend.
Again, it depends. If you're sitting with an existing system that's on premise, that might actually make the journey different to if you're sitting with something that's a bit more platform as a service or cloud-based. So the journey is somewhat different, but yes, what they share is that they need to have access to information through APIs, and most monolithic solutions today, or it's not even because it has to be associated to it being monolithic, but most solutions today do have APIs that allows you to actually consume some of the data and some of the content that you need.
Right. So what would you say, like which kind of businesses benefit the most from a headless tech stack? Is that actually an answer you can give?
Yeah, I guess so, because it all comes down to the maturity of that organization. Can they take advantage of what it allows you to do? Right? If you end up going headless and you succeed in executing that step, but you continue to not do a high frequency of change, you continue to not leverage the fact that your front end can change independently of the back end, then you haven't taken advantage of the opportunity. So I think it really comes down to maturity, making sure that you are also able to do and take advantage of what it actually allows you to do going forward. One of the things, if you're sitting hypothetically in an organization where your front end is protected by a change approval board, that's likely a red flag in you being able to take the opportunity that headless kind of presents to you as a business. There needs to be much more flexibility on how you kind of allow change to happen within that front end part of your actual stack. If not, then you're sitting and basically repeating what you did before, just in a new type of technology stack and a new type of framework.
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight that it's more than just saying I have this like small software project here and I'll keep everything unchanged. There's a bit of a mindset shift that people have to do.
Yeah, and it's not because it's necessarily hard, nor is it because it's monumental, but there are just some prerequisites. There are just some really important factors to really go in and consider to make sure that you as a business can go in and really get some value from the type of shifts and changes that you are introducing. Don't go headless for the sake of headless, do it for a good reason, and then make sure that you can also gain value from it. Right.
And maybe this actually kind of ties this up a little bit, because we started out talking about omnichannel and then kind of how headless is a first step on that journey towards omnichannel. But you also said that it's like that's not the end of the journey, right? So can you paint a picture of how things continue after maybe you've taken that first step of going headless?
What we typically see, and it really depends on where you are today as a business, but what we typically see is that headless then allows you to actually rethink the way you are managing and working with the backend services that kind of constitute your stack, the underlying transactional content data capabilities that you need. That's where composable really comes in. So we kind of also see headless being a stepping stone on a composable journey where you start to really break down and introduce these more individual and independent components that you can create experiences from. So really, we see MACH and composable being a natural progression from more of a headless type of an achievement. As I said before, omnichannel is really equally a mindset thing. So even within composable and MACH software as a service like products, you can also design your content model with a website in mind. Omnichannel means that you're going in and thinking about content in a much different type of a way. So that's even a progression from there, if that makes sense. So it is truly a multi-step type of an approach. And this can even span years, right? Like we're sitting and summarizing as if it's 1, 2, 3, and you're done. This is a year-over-year type of transformation because it's super complicated from a technology stack standpoint. It requires your business and your people to change the way they work, the way they think, the way they collaborate, meaning there is monumental change that's kind of associated with some of these technology steps that we're sitting and discussing today.
Absolutely. And just to summarize it again, because I thought this was super insightful, basically, Headless is the first step, might just be, okay, you have your monolith and you cut off the head and you put on a new one that you own. And that kind of starts giving you the capability to say, okay, maybe for this service, my recommendation engine or something like that, I'm breaking out and I'm not calling the monolith anymore. I'm calling the new service that either I'm buying or I decided this is really my core competency and that's how I want to grow my business. And so I'm building it myself. And then you're at this step where you have a set of composable APIs. And now you can say, okay, I'll put a second hat on it. That's maybe not the web. It might be, in the metaverse, or it might be in my point of sale.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yes.
Awesome. So kind of just bringing it back, obviously you're head of the MACH Alliance. Like if I'm, hopefully this is an interesting webinar, like I'm interested, how can folks get involved?
So it really depends on whether you are a brand or a business, meaning someone benefiting and leveraging MACH and composable architectures, or if you are a member. Clearly, if you're sitting with a business today, you're thinking of going down a MACH and a composable type journey, I can only recommend you to actually engage with some of the educational content we have. There is a newsletter that you can actually subscribe to. And then we've also just recently published what we call the MACH book, which is basically a repository of member profiles to help you also kind of navigate the space of all of these different types of options and companies that the MACH Alliance collectively represent. If you're a member, then clearly there is lots of opportunity for you to get involved as well. We have councils, we have task forces, we have projects, we have all sorts of initiatives that the MACH Alliance is working on. And as I said, initially, the MACH Alliance is truly member-led, meaning everything happens from within the actual alliance and membership portfolio itself. We're all contributing to that greater good of the actual industry and the broader adoption of MACH as a principle.
Awesome. Yeah, and just to kind of contextualize also, like, obviously I work for Vercel. We kind of see ourselves sometimes as like the new head for Headless. So we're interested in having people kind of, as they're going on this journey, do it with us. I think the best way to find out actually what we're doing very concretely is our product tour, which we recently launched on vercel.com/product-tour. And people can email us at productadvocates@vercel.com. And we'd love to hear from people, going on this journey. Again, like Headless being kind of the first step, we're incredibly happy to help people go along that way. And this is all we had today. I think it was an amazing discussion. Like I actually learned a lot. Like again, like I'm somewhat new to the industry. So I think this really was a great way of learning like how all these like buzzwords that people have in their mind come together. Thank you very much, Casper.
You're very welcome, and thanks for having me.